She knows. Like y'all, why don't we move y'all closer together and then.
Oh, can I help you?
But what we do is very informal. We don't. We just
Mhm.
we just talk, reminisce.
This interview is in the Skirvin Hotel, November the 16th, 1972. We have Miss Maria Tallchief, uh, whose married name is Mrs. Passion. What is the given name of your husband?
My husband's name is Mr. Henry Daniel Passion.
Thank you. Um, since this is our statehood day, and since Miss Tallchief is one of the few that we are honoring on this at this time, uh, tonight she will be an inductee into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and Western Heritage, a place that she so justly belongs in. We're very proud of her. She's one of the daughters of the first families of Oklahoma, of Indian blood. We feel that these particularly belong to us in Oklahoma. And the fact that she has brought fame to our state, to her name, as a world ballerina, it gives us great privilege to be able to have her just a little while on the tape. We want her to feel free to tell us anything she wants to tell us. I may suggest a few things along, but we'd like very much for her to feel free to just talk. Miss Choteau, in guiding us to her and telling us how to find her and how to get hold of her, paid her friend such a compliment, I thought, when she said, "Oh, you'll just love her. She's just so natural. She's just like she is." And truly, that's the way I'm finding her. Miss Tallchief will be the next voice that you hear.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Roberts. I suppose since we are talking about Oklahoma, I should begin by saying that I'm very proud to have been born in Oklahoma, Fairfax, to be exact, which is in Osage County. As you probably know, my father was a full-blooded Osage Indian, another matter that I am very proud of. My mother is Scotch-Irish and was part of one of the early settlers in Oklahoma. I suppose that the great rush that was, what, in 1898? I think my mother was probably born in her mother's arms in that rush. At any rate, my father's name was Alexander Joseph Tallchief, and we lived in Fairfax with my mother and father, my sister and brother, until I was about 7 or 8 years old. I began my study of dancing there and piano also. I loved Fairfax. I still do. My mother lives there still, as does my brother and all my other relatives.
How old were you when you started your dancing?
Well, I was very young when I started to dance,
Very
much too young. We used to go to Colorado every summer, as most people did at that time, because it was too hot to stay in Oklahoma. So we would go out to Colorado Springs, and my mother tells me that my first dancing lesson was at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs. Incidentally, I hated it. I was a very shy, very Indian young child. I think I was about 3, and on being asked to do certain things which were alien to my nature, or any child's nature, I resented it and, of course, didn't want to do it. However, I finally acquiesced and started to dance and never stopped until recently when I stopped to stay home with my husband and child. At any rate, I started to dance, and then later on my sister started to dance. At the same time I was studying piano, and everyone thought that my sister and I were some kind of geniuses because we could dance and managed to get up on our toes and turn around, and we danced in rodeos and scout benefits, etc. Finally, my family were persuaded that we should move to California, where there were teachers, good teachers, with whom we could study. This was also the era of Shirley Temple, a time when every mother wanted her darling little daughter to to wear those same curls and look just like Shirley Temple. And I don't know if Mother really thought we were going to turn into other Shirley Temples, but anyway, we moved to Los Angeles and fortunately found a very good teacher there who immediately put us back to start studying all over again. We had the teacher here from, I believe she was from Tulsa, really was not a good teacher. We should not have studied dancing when we were 3 or 4 years old. It's much too early to start. So at any rate, we went out to California, to Los Angeles, and Mother happily found a very good teacher for both of us. And I began to study dancing. Really good dancing, yes, really study of dancing. Before that, I'd been dancing, but I didn't know what I was doing.
How about your schooling? Did it go right along with your dancing?
Oh, yes. We were expected to do very well academically in school. And at the same time, as I said before, I also was studying the piano. So happens that I have what is called absolute pitch, which means that I can identify. Well, it's something one's born with. It's something that I didn't acquire or learn.
That they do not have.
Yes, you're just born with it.
That's
So,
true.
of course, that, again, was something that made my mother believe that I was some kind of also a genius in the piano. So I was urged to study, which I did. All the time that I was studying dancing, I also studied the piano and practiced assiduously until I graduated from high school and joined the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. I decided I'd rather be a dancer than a pianist.
You finally had to make a choice.
I
didn't
did
you?
finally make the choice. I always loved dancing, much the best, however.
Tell me something about your entrance into the Ballet Russe. And,
Well, I was studying with, by this time, we had come under a few different teachers, Aegeus, and I was studying with Madame Bronislava Nijinská, the sister of the famous Nijinsky. And I was like her protege. She was extremely kind to me, and I benefited so much from her vast knowledge. She was a born dancer. Her whole life was dancing. Her family, her mother and father's life was dancing in
very
Russia.
dedicated,
Yes.
I see.
So, of course, when I met this kind of person, it was a great inspiration to me to want to emulate Madame Nijinská. By this time, of course, she didn't dance anymore, but I did see many beautiful dancers who came to Los Angeles and would come to class with us, and I was able to see them and admire them from afar, and it was a thrilling moment for me to meet these kind of great stars in the ballet world. So when I had graduated from Beverly Hills High School in California, I, in the interim, had auditioned for the head of the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, who had said, well, perhaps one day after school. Of course, my mother insisted that I finish school, and I'm so glad that she did. After I had graduated, then I went to New York and presented myself, and happily there was a place for me, not immediately, but in a few months, and so I was taken into the Ballet Russe. And as I said before, I never stopped dancing.
Miss Chateau was commenting on what dedication and what real work it is as you progress through the various stages to the prima ballerina. Can you tell us something about your years of
Well, there are not very many prima ballerinas. I
No.
would say that there are practically none.
but
That is a prima ballerina means the person who is the first ballerina in the company. It's like being a five-star general. There are many people who call themselves prima ballerinas, but they are not.
It to the same thing, to the military.
It's an absolute five-star general, and it's something which is it's an accolade. It's quite a marvelous thing to be. And now that I haven't danced for about 6 years, I often think that I was probably very spoiled, because after having done all of this work and then being the prima ballerina of the New York City Ballet and American Ballet Theater, and indeed any place I danced, it's rather difficult. I expect everyone to just, when I say something, that is absolutely it. There is no other way, because after all, I know this. Oh, no, not about life, but only about dancing. So, at any rate, it is something with which one lives. It's a life, and there can be no other life. And this is why I eventually decided that I had married, and I have my beautiful daughter. And I found that
What
I
is her
was,
name?
her name is Elise, Elise Maria Passion. And she, I decided it was time for me to stay home with my husband and with my daughter. And I have not regretted it, let us say.
It's a wonderful fulfillment for you, I know.
Well, I feel that some people say to me sometimes, I now live in Chicago where my husband's business is, and they'll say, oh, don't you miss it, and don't you wish you could dance again? Well, I don't think anyone really realized how long I danced. I joined the Ballet Russe when I was 17. By the time I was 20, I was already the first ballerina of the New York City Ballet.
You had already reached
Yes,
the top.
and then I must have danced, I've never counted it, to tell you the truth, but I danced all over the world for 20 years. So I feel that I gave a great deal and received a great deal, I might say.
It's all right. I should check and see if a little needle is moving.
Machines confuse me.
I just wanted to be sure I'm getting it. I wanted you to tell us just a little bit more about the little daughter. Will she be a dancer?
No, I don't believe so. She has studied dancing off and on since she was about 7. She is primarily interested in music. She does very well. She has a lovely singing voice. She plays the piano. She is a very good student. She's very interested in her school and in her academic work. I'm told by her teachers that she is exceptionally bright, which pleases me. I know that she's enthusiastic about everything, which also pleases me.
Oh, of course. Tell us something about your husband, and how did you meet him? Is he a dancer
Oh,
also?
heavens no. My husband, my husband, I met, his nickname is Buzzy. I met Buzzy when I was dancing at the Opera House in Chicago. He was born and bred in Chicago. He's very proud of that, much the same as I'm proud of Oklahoma. And he is in the construction business. Passion contractors. They build high-rise buildings and such things as tunnels and bridges, etc. He's very fascinating.
One of his in Chicago when I was there.
Oh, you may well have. It probably could either have been built by him or by his father. It's a very large company, family company. And I met him at the yacht club, as a matter of fact. A mutual friend of ours introduced us. He was a sailor at that time. That was his hobby. And it was quite wonderful to meet someone who had absolutely nothing to do with the dance, but who soon was very enthusiastic about it and became quite an expert before we stopped. He felt he knew a great deal. I'm not sure he did.
I'm sure he hardly missed a performance.
Oh, heavens no, he didn't miss any performances. I was dancing. But it was quite amusing for many of my friends that I would marry completely outside of my world. But I think it certainly has broadened my outlook in life. I think it's quite wonderful to be able to see all sides of life and try to understand it.
As I said, I'm sure that because your marriage and the baby daughter, I'm sure have certainly brought a fulfillment to you that perhaps even the highest honors in ballerina, as a ballerina, perhaps could never have given you in that satisfaction.
I would say that it's quite a different kind of feeling.
Yeah.
I can see it now objectively, which I couldn't have done, let's say, 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling is quite different. It's nonetheless pleasurable, and in both senses. I mean, it's a wonderful, satisfying kind of thing to be able to share with somebody else And I found that, for instance, when I was dancing, it was a very lonely life, and though there would be many accolades, and it's a very thrilling thing to stand on the stage of the Paris Opera House, or the Covent Garden Opera House, or the Opera House in Russia. And yes, it's quite. I mean, it's a thrilling kind of thing, but it's also a thrilling thing to me to be proud of my family, to whatever.
New York one time when you were dancing.
Oh, you were? Well, I danced a great deal in New York. Indeed. I danced a great deal all over the world. My husband was amused the other night. He was talking about going to somebody coming from Nebraska, from Lincoln, to visit him in Chicago, a businessman. So I didn't say anything. Finally, he realized that I had indeed danced in Lincoln, Nebraska, too. I said, honey, you don't realize I've danced in every town in the United States that had anything to dance in, and Europe, too, as far as that's concerned. So, at any rate, it was a very satisfying, wonderful life, and a great deal of work, a great deal of hard work. I don't know if I would want my daughter to do something like that. I think unless you really want it very, very much, it would be a great mistake to go into something that is so demanding. It's like living in a convent. You have no time for anything else.
As a teacher in university for years, I saw so many times where parents tried to choose the vocation for the child, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, I don't think you can choose a vocation. You can lead them. You can guide them. You can present
Right.
many prerogatives to them, which is the best thing I think you can do.
This will be required of you if you go this route.
Mm.
If you go this route, it will be so and so and so and so and so and so. But I think the ultimate choice
It was theirs, must be theirs.
must be if they make the best out of it.
Well, I think so. Of course it has to be. And I don't know. Talent, of course, is the first requisite in any of the arts. That's
I'm glad you
absolute.
didn't say that. I have always contended that it was born in you.
Yes. Oh, yes. But then there are so many other qualities. And this is what many parents don't understand. That besides the talent, besides being born with the right configuration,
Still has to have work.
all of the other qualities that have to be there, perseverance,
Right.
perhaps is almost the most important. The ability to be able to get up and do again when perhaps you haven't succeeded. To start all over again. Initiative. And then I felt a great deal in my life had to do with really luck. I was very lucky. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. But what I realized with experience was that it wasn't only luck either. It was being able to take advantage of that luck. And so that you learn. When you're young, you don't, because you are trying to enjoy life, and perhaps you didn't take advantage of the right moment. But it doesn't take very long to learn, not if you have any kind of sense.
Tell us some of the experiences that you had backstage and with audiences, and perhaps some in your travels. Even getting to these places must have sometimes been quite a problem.
Well, I'm trying to think of some experiences. It's funny in retrospect, at the time there were many amusing ones and sad ones and tiring ones.
Exciting ones.
Well, of course, the ones that you remember the greatest are the best, are the exciting ones. I mean, I remember very well, I guess I was 20, standing on the stage of the Paris Opera House. It has to be one of the most beautiful opera houses in the world. And in front of me was a whole symphony orchestra. And beyond that were, just probably the most elegantly dressed people in the world, sophisticated people. And it was 5 years before that. I was a very young girl, still studying French in school with the idea that maybe one day I might have some use for it. Boy, did I have some use for it. Nobody spoke English at that whole opera house. And I, with my high school French, was trying to get along, telling my partners in French now, you know, what to do next. And I couldn't remember my French words. But anyway, the whole thing. Well, oh, I was way past that. I had taken 4 years of French in high school. I had thought quite a deal ahead of all this. And anyway, then, well, I suppose I can remember toward the end of my career, we had toured in Russia, and we had a few of us from the company, the very higher echelon of the company, had been invited to have supper with Mr. Khrushchev and his wife and his whole cabinet. I don't know what it was called, Politburo something. And that was a very exciting moment. He had come to the performance at the last moment. It was we were touring in Russia when he was stamping his shoe at the UN. And none of us in Russia knew about it. I was with American Ballet Theater at this point as a guest star. And we didn't know about the shoe stamping, and because we had no American papers in Russia to read. And so we were touring there and got back to Moscow, and it was funny, it was during the first ballet, and I was dancing the lead in Les Sylphides, and I felt in the audience, in the middle of the ballet, I don't know what one could call it, a clamor, a noise, something, a shuffling. And I thought, oh goodness, somebody's lost their costume, or somebody's fallen down, or something awful, or have I lost my costume, you know? So I'm sort of and I came off stage, and I said, what's happened? They said, Mr. Khrushchev has arrived. So, well, I was amazed. I knew that he had not greeted us when we had arrived in Russia, in Moscow, and this was 60 weeks later. We were dancing back again in Moscow, and he had known that we were performing, and he had come indeed to the performance. All the Russians, half of their life is the ballet, as you probably know. And
it was his favorite.
Oh, his favorite. And then it was a amusing thing during the evening. I was seated across from him and his interpreter, and he was telling me the story about the fact that his granddaughter had been refused entrance into the school, the Bolshoi School of Ballet, because she was too fat. Then I thought, wow, politics didn't enter there. They didn't. I was absolutely amazed. At any rate, that was, I don't know, in late October. And then I found myself in mid-November being greeted by the Queen of England backstage in London. And I thought, dear me, here I am, a little girl from Fairfax, Oklahoma. I was supper with Khrushchev, and then 3 weeks later, I'm being congratulated by the Queen of England. It was quite amazing.
Tell us about her and what your impression was.
Well, I was very tired, as I always am after a performance, really exhausted. I don't think anybody knows how tired you really are. It's almost to a point of just sheer exhaustion, and incapable of really even talking or wanting to talk, certainly not to see anybody, but one pulls oneself together on certain occasions. At any rate, I had gone over to dance. I had flown from Russia back to Chicago, back home, and my daughter was 2 at the time. I remember how happy I was to see her. And then I flew back to London at the invitation of Dame Margot Fontaine to appear at a gala performance for the benefit of the Royal School of Ballet. And it was a matinee performance done in Drury Lane Theatre. And in Europe, the stages are all very slanted. Well, this stage in Drury Lane Theatre was slanted more than any. You could hardly stand up. And amusingly enough, they used to have a slanted stage in Tulsa. It was the only slanted stage in America. A slight slant to the stage. It must have been copied off of from European theaters. Gives the audience a much better view, actually.
I never knew where it came from.
From Europe, copied from all the theaters. At any rate, I was accustomed to this to a degree, but not to this particular. I can remember being so frightened that I was just going to, just keep on going and end up in the orchestra pit. At any rate, I did this very difficult pas de deux, and afterwards we were greeted, we were asked to wait backstage, and we were greeted and thanked by Her Majesty. And I remember my sister also danced at the same performance with her husband, and my sister has spent most of her life in Europe, in France. She danced with the Marquis de Cuevas company there. And so I was so nervous that when Lord Snowden came to me and congratulated me and then said, "And where are you going to go next?" Instead of saying, "I'm going back home to Chicago," I said, "Oh, I'm going back home to Paris." I guess I thought I was my sister for a minute. I said, "Oh, no, no, I'm not going to Paris. I'm going to Chicago." So I must say, it's, all of these kind of things are very thrilling. Not because it's a queen or not because it's a premier, but because I suppose what it stands for and just the fact that, I mean, you know, you're there. And I must say the same when I first went to the White House in Washington was the same kind. I mean, it's almost, one can't believe that one is there, you know. Why I should be in the studio practicing. Why am I here? Why, you know, the President of the United States? Goodness me, you know, it's just, it's a plus. It's an added plus. I never thought that something like that would happen to me.
You have danced for the president?
Oh, yes. Actually, I
More than
received,
one?
well, yes, I was given an award the first time by the President Eisenhower, and was made a Woman of the Year by the Women's National Press Club. That was a very thrilling, perhaps the greatest thrill for me, because then in Oklahoma they had a Maria Tallchief Day, which I thought was, one is so rarely recognized in one's own home. This seems to be an absolute truth, isn't it? So I'm very happy to be here today for this wonderful honor that is this evening in the Hall of Fame. But at that time, I've forgotten what year it was, to find myself in the White House with President Eisenhower and all of his cabinet and everyone that I had heard so much about and known about and read about, that was perhaps the greatest thrill of all in my career. Perhaps it was because of the recognition, the fact that our own government recognized the ballet, and I felt that I was representing everyone in my certain field of art. It wasn't just me, but I thought, at last, I mean, it's because we are not a country oriented, as you know, as yet for the arts. We are a very young country. It'll take us a while. Oh, certainly. And I think Oklahoma has really been foremost of all the states in the United States in showing the way toward this. The pride it takes in its artists, I think, is wonderful.
Well, to be as young a state as we are, of course we've had Miss Kyoto, and we've had you, and we've had others to blaze the trail for our young people who are now beginning, I feel, to be tremendously cognizant of the arts, and I believe that we are progressing at a much more rapid rate now than people realize that we are.
Well, I think certainly that it's, from what I can see from afar in the magazines and such as that, that Oklahoma is proud of its artists, not only performing artists, but your painters. You have wonderful museums here. It's a very gratifying thing for me to see. As an Oklahoman, I am very proud that this is taking place, and I'm sure that you have many civic leaders who are helping a great deal in this and developing centers of art where one can perform and where great works of art can be seen and exhibited.
My daughter is in California, in Berkeley, at the university there, and she didn't come home we were out there quite often, but she was not home for a period of almost 12 years. When she came home, she could not realize, Mother, freeways, Mother, art galleries, Mother, and so on. One by one, she went through these things that 15 years before, when she left Oklahoma, we didn't have. She couldn't believe that Oklahoma was achieving as much culture and interest in arts and in things that really profess people like that did. And I realized in seeing it through her eyes how much Oklahoma has achieved through young people like you and
Well, it's
Kyoto
wonderful
and
that this can happen. Um, I have to say, some of the best audiences that I have ever danced for were here in Oklahoma. I can remember very well flying in to dance right here in Oklahoma City. I think 2 performances at the convention hall. What was in the big auditorium here?
Yes. Civic
Music hall now.
Yeah, and goodness me, the enthusiasm was just great. It was with the symphony here, a long time
Yeah.
ago. It was a wonderfully appreciative audience, and I enjoyed very much dancing here.
And when we were on the West Coast, we heard that the Oklahoma City audience was one of the warmest. That one of the performers who performed for the San Francisco Opera said that the Oklahoma City Opera audience was one of the warmest that she had met.
Mm.
And oh, I was so thrilled. that
Yes,
night
it
that
is.
she
It's a
said
wonderful.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about Fairfax, if you remember it. at the
Oh, well,
time.
Fairfax, I remember very well. It's a very tiny town. If you go too fast, you'll miss it. There's a Tallchief Theater on the main street. Let's see, what else? We live in a house, a lovely house on the hill. Beautiful panoramic view of all Osage County surrounding us. I went to school there until I was 8 years old. My grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, lived for always right down at the bottom of the hill. She was a lovely, lovely woman. I have 2 half-brothers and a half-sister who passed away 2 years ago, but my 2 half-brothers are still alive. One of them raises quarter horses in Fairfax. And the other one was a football hero, as a matter of fact. He went to OU, Tommy Tallchief. He ran away and joined the Navy. Otherwise, he was scheduled to be an All-American, apparently. When I go to OU now, they say, "Aren't you Tommy Tallchief's sister?" I say, "Yes." It's like going to Europe and being said, "Aren't you Marjorie Tallchief's sister?" Yes, I am.
Quite a switch.
Well, I'm very proud of that, too. Just like I'm very proud of being
Is
Mrs. Passion right now.
Is Marjorie still dancing?
Oh, well, Marjorie, I don't know. I think they're living right now between Paris, France, and Dallas, Texas. Her husband is a very well-known choreographer, and she, I think she performs once in a while as a guest artist, but as a steady, regular performance schedule, no, not any longer. Her twin boys are now, oh goodness, they're going to be 21 next July. They're both in colleges, doing very well. One of them is going to take a degree in law, I believe, and the other one in economics. So in my old age, they can take care of Aunt Maria.
What is her married name?
Skibine,
I forgot.
Skibine. Her husband is George Skibine. He was for many years the artistic director of the Paris Opera.
Right.
And then before that, he was with the Marquis de Cuevas company, and that's when my sister met him, and they married, and they danced together all over Europe and all of the great opera houses there, and had 2 boys. But my sister still continued to dance, but Paris then became her sort of focal point, and the 2 of them then went and danced in the Paris Opera House. And he became the choreographer and artistic director of the Opera House in Paris. And now they're back in America. So I believe very happily so. I don't think my sister liked living abroad that much.
How many famous artists in the dance? I mean famous to the extent that they have really achieved recognition abroad and everywhere. How many do you know of from Oklahoma?
Abroad and everywhere.
Everywhere. Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, Rosella Hightower
Yes.
lived and still lives in France, as you know.
Yes.
And I believe she was born in Oklahoma. I think so.
With whom?
Kansas, Oklahoma. And of course my sister, who has lived all over, the world. I don't believe that Musia Larkina and Yvonne danced in Europe. I don't think they ever went abroad. I think they mainly were in the United States.
Yes.
So they probably weren't in companies that went any place else besides the United States.
Mhm.
So it's, but that's fine too.
I understand that we have 3 or 4 now who are very hopeful, young hopefuls for the same type of
Well, there,
ballet. And
there are, I saw when I came down last month there was to audition some young dancers. There were, I would say, 2 or 3 very talented girls, which is very rare. You don't find talent that often. And so I was very pleased to see that. I think that you do have a few very talented young aspiring dancers here in Oklahoma. I haven't been to Tulsa, where, of course, the Yazinskis have an excellent school. I'm sure that they have developed. I know that he was developing. He had a school for young boys, hoping to train young boys to dance, because this is, again, that's even rarer than a talented young girl. So, at any rate, I think the most important thing is a good school. If you have a good school, then if the talent is there, if the perseverance is there, if you have some help from your parents and guidance, good guidance, then certainly there's no reason why we can't produce more good dancers in Oklahoma, and I'm sure we will.
I feel like we will. Do you have some particular point or interesting incident in your life that perhaps was very influential in guiding you or causing you to make a certain decision?
Well, it's strange. There was never a point in my life where I had to make a great decision. I, as you know, went into the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and from there I began when the New York City Ballet first started. We started the New York City Ballet. It was the first ballet society. And those were very lean years. We danced maybe 3 times the first year. Well, this is the way a ballet company begins. We had no money. We had an old theater that they let us have on Monday night when no one else wanted it, truthfully. We had to rehearse at 7 in the morning, and that was our one time on the stage and with the orchestra, and sometimes we didn't even have our costumes, as opposed to a company in Europe where you have maybe 5 dress rehearsals complete with orchestra before your first performance. But you see, we Americans like this challenge. That's about as challenging as it can get, too, I'll tell you. At any rate, I suppose the first time when I first danced Firebird was the most frightening and challenging thing of my life. It was the first time I had danced a known role. Up until then, I had danced roles which had more or less been choreographed for me or that I felt I was particularly suited to. Now, the Firebird is a role that is known as a virtuoso role for a woman, and it had been danced by all the greatest ballerinas of time past. I had not seen a Firebird. I suppose by the time I came along, they were no longer dancing, the great ballerinas who had danced this particular role. But it was choreographed for me, but at the same time it held that magical name. And everybody in New York City was waiting to see what was going to happen, because I had not danced such an important role. This, when you can take the stage in something which the whole ballet is focused only on one point, and that point is you, then this is something that, well, it's a great challenge, and it's a great responsibility. I remember standing in the wings to this haunting Stravinsky music. Stravinsky himself was conducting in the pit, and I was literally shaking with fear. I don't even remember the performance. I remember that every once in a while I'd hear a gasp from the city center audience, and then the curtain came down at the end, and I didn't know if I'd done well or, I didn't, because it wasn't the kind of ballet where there was applause in the middle.
So in character.
Well, no, it wasn't that. I just didn't, you're always aware of everything, but in this it was just so very important. And then there was just kind of a hush, and then all of a sudden it was like a football field. You know, it was like, it was the most incredible kind of feeling. I'll never forget that. The performance, the feeling of that, I've forgotten. But this, I mean, it was just something that was, you know, I'll never forget this. My heart almost stopped beating. So, wait just one moment. Elise, can you take it? Where is that monitor? Well, tell her to come on up.
We can close it. We can close the interview anytime that you are needed elsewhere.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I think I better go and get dressed. Thank you very much.
We wish to thank you so much for this interview. And Mr. Woods, would you like to say something?
No, I think it's a great interview, and I don't want to mess it up. It's been too good.
Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure. You don't know how I'll treasure these few moments that I've had. Thank you so much.
Had a wonderful time. Thank you. That's my sister arriving.
Oh.
Oh, what?